Boss fights are a critical moment for a video game. They're the point being built to, the third act after the stage is set, the quiz after a hard week of studying. Well, they fill a lot of purposes, but regardless of orientation or classification, one thing stands true for them all. If they fail to stick the landing, we no longer remember the early hours of glory, only the disappointment it was building towards. At least that's true for most games. You do a level, you fight a boss, repeat the process, do not pass go. But certain ones aren't like the other girls, and that's when the entire formula is thrown out the window and curb stomped in submission. But boss fights are more than just a battle against a weird mole or a demon with dogs. They're an opportunity to tell a story. Not through words or an unskippable cutscene, but through action and design. They're an opportunity to make us question why we're fighting or give us a good reason to be. But after the boss bout, after the enemy is defeated and you're standing victorious beyond them, the biggest battle will still be on the horizon, so we must keep fighting. Ooh, so dramatic. Also, there are minor spoilers in this video, so pause and read this if you want more info. Boss fights are meant to be an engaging event that caps off the experience, but the landing strip can be drastically different depending on the game and the particular boss's placement in it. The rules remain the same regardless, but are malleable. Sometimes a boss is merely there to teach you something. In most Zelda games, you get an item in the dungeon. The dungeon teaches you how to use it, and the boss is the final test for that item. But after the game teaches you how to use it, you never really touch it again outside of the boss, combat-wise. Which kinda sucks, but this isn't a Zelda critique video. Or is it? Nah, it's still a work in progress. Dark Souls 3's tutorial boss is a little quirky. It's still very much there to teach you the concepts and patterns of the game, but with an interesting twist. Dark Souls combat is brutally fair. It has a reputation for this, but compared to its predecessors, Dark Souls 3 isn't. In Dark Souls 1, you learn via the— oh my god, look at that thing! God damn! While it does teach you that the game is very difficult, its patterns are rather simple and slow, and you can even cut down a lot of the demon's health right off the rip with a drop it like it's hot attack. Gundyr from Dark Souls 3's first phase mimics that style. The attacks are pretty simple, and if you can learn how to parry, it's child's play. Definitely still very difficult for a new player, but not impossible. Phase 2 is when the boss kicks into gear and it really starts teaching. This boss teaches the player two very valuable things about Dark Souls 3 that aren't really true for the previous games. This world is unforgiving. FromSoft made Bloodborne before this game and they really want you to remember that. And more importantly, the world is just a facade for a much more dark and sinister underbelly. A world wrought with disease and depression. A world that is truly not okay, and it doesn't want you to know that at a glance. This Phase 2 is not a tutorial for the gameplay mechanics, beyond showing you that Phase 2s exist, but it's rather a thematic resonance for the experience you're about to consume. We'll talk more about that crap in Chapter 2. What it does have in common with Zelda and other tutorial bosses is that it is a skill check. Because if you can't beat Gundyr, if you don't have the willpower to defeat the insurmountable task that is Gwyneth Paltrow's Goop, then you won't make it very far into Dark Souls 3. In that instance, it is a tutorial, but it blurs the line with a very different type of boss. One's purely built for challenge. These are often optional bosses that capitalize on the game's mechanics to raise the difficulty for the player and deliver something more unique than the average required boss. These are some of the most rewarding boss fights in gaming and the most memorable, from Melania to Sephiroth in Kingdom Hearts. My favorite, on the other hand, is pretty early in its game. The Mantis Lords. While Gundyr is a tutorial first and a challenging boss fight second, these girlies swap that around because they're optional. They are the final skill check for the player after learning fluid movement tech. Every fight before the Mantises are pretty simple, but these nerds fight with actual tactics, not just blindly swinging. The Mantis Lords follow that theme, with organized attacks that almost feel like choreography. It feels like a dance and the music matches that vibe. These attacks utilize a finite state machine. This is how most games work, it's just kind of more obvious here. The boss does an attack and then returns to its default position, and then it does another attack based on the player distance, action or position, often with tells to warn the player. The Mantis Lords are an example of a simple state machine, reminiscent of classic games, but many modern games have loads of different options for the boss to choose from. A lot of classic games also utilize set patterns or just straight up randomization, but I'm getting off track. If I harp on about games before the 2000s for too long, all the kids born after the PS2 will start screaming "Boomer!" at me and then skibbity gritty their way down to the dislike button, and I can't have that. With Mantis Lords, once you learn the choreography, you're immediately put to the test with a second phase, or in this case, a second sister. Then in the DLC, I'm actually not going to spoil that one for you. I'm going to hold back. Play Hollow Knight. This is an example of a bad concept done well. Often games will simply copy-paste a second boss into a fight, raising the challenge by making you fight two of them at once. Or even worse, spawning in standard enemies mid-fight. The Mantises are instead two spears acting as one entity, taking turns because they're all about honor and respect. The end from Metal Gear I promise this video is about Monster Hunter eventually. The end from Metal Gear Solid 3 is a perfect example of a challenging boss, but done in a required way. Rather than a break from normal gameplay, rather than being positioned as a boss fight, the End's fight is just kind of the regular gameplay you've been doing the whole time, but turned up to 11.
Does that mean it's louder? Is it any louder?
Well, it's one louder, isn't it?
It's a stealth mission with a very old sniper. It is slow, methodical, and requires the player to use every mechanic of the game to defeat him. The ultimate skill check. Or you can just wait a week and he'll die of old age. All of these are the most common bosses in gaming. Tutorials, challenges, or somewhere in between. But with just these, a game can become stale and samey. A boss doesn't have to restrain itself to the rules that the rest of the game is restricted to. As long as the boss is engaging, they can kinda do whatever. Predictability is control, and taking away that predictability is an amazing way to make something impactful and surprising, or at the very least, deliver a break from normal gameplay. This is where the gimmick boss comes into play. When they're done right, they're a breath of fresh air, like the Great Serpent in Elden Ring. A fantastic fight with one of the best arenas in the game that tells you so much about the boss's role in the story with no words being spoken or read. Plus destructible pillars to show strength, and an amazing storm spell in the second phase that utilizes the high ceiling of the volcano. Could have used more paralyzing frogs though. This is an example of a colossal boss. They're very commonly used for gimmick fights since they're very hard to design in most genres due to the camera making it difficult for the player to see during them. Games with set cameras, like turn-based games, where boss fights are more like a puzzle, feature massive enemies a lot more often. But for everyone else, most of these fights either end up like Bed of Chaos in Dark Souls 1, where it was meant to be a puzzle mixed with platforming, but ended up being creator Hidetaka Miyazaki's biggest regret, or like Zora Magdaros in Monster Hunter World, we're getting to it, where you're just kind of running around waiting for a timer to run out, like Chronos in God of War, but infinitely worse. Shadow of the Colossus is a masterclass in this done well. It's in the name, but even it struggles from time to time. More on that in a minute, just hang on. Without changing the camera, it's hard to show off the massive scale when you can't see any. Another common gimmick is removing the boss entirely and just having a challenging segment with boss-like qualities. My favorite version of this is from Ori and the Blind Forest, when you have to escape a flood. I will never forget the music swelling as the tide rapidly approached Ori, all for it to culminate in this wonderful, beautiful moment. Crash Bandicoot also does this with the chase segments, but not as cinematic. In most games, a lot of these boss concepts don't get to blossom. Developers are limited by time and money and resources, as we all are, so they don't get to go all in on what a boss fight can truly be. That's just most games. Yeah, we're talking about all bosses in all games, but these types are really the focus. Usually bosses are at the end of a level, the end of a third act, but what if the boss is every act? What if the boss is the whole level? Games with only boss fights are what this video is truly about. Or is it? By making everything that surrounds the boss just details or tools to help you with the boss, at least at a glance, stay tuned, the devs can focus on the bosses, which results in better boss fights, but puts the onus on them to tell a lot of the story. From Cuphead to Fury to Everhood, please play Everhood. There are tons of examples of this kind of game with tons of innovation inside of them. Rather than analyzing every single one of them, which would be super boring, let's return to one of the games that debatably founded the modern boss-only game, Shadow of the Colossus. Bosses instead are treated like multi-phase puzzles. You have to find a mounting place, and then find a weak point, and then repeat this process with increasing difficulty. Do not pass go! The reason I think this game is so influential is twofold. The first is its use of non-vocal storytelling, but we're gonna wait on that one for a minute. And the second is because every boss would be a gimmick boss in a different game, even including their massive size. Despite this, it follows all the rules we've spoken about, including the last one, with the final boss, which plays more like a sad stealth mission. There's no other game like Shadow of the Colossus. It's unique. Pray for the Gods tried, but didn't quite nail it. Then there's Solar Ash and the Pathless, but still, again. And that's actually Shadow's biggest flaw. It's only one game with a really good remake. Every other game made by Gen Design, the developers, are completely different genres. They're all fantastic, but they're not this. On the contrary, this is Monster Hunter's biggest boon. I told you we were gonna get to it, you just had to be patient. See, we're here. Unlike every game I've mentioned so far, Monster Hunter does 3 things vastly different, and it causes the boss fights to be perfected. Firstly, Monster Hunter has been around for over 20 years. And if we rewind time and observe that first game, it is rough. You had to claw grip the controller to move and control the camera at the same time, since the camera controls were bound to the D-pad to make room for the right joystick to be used for attacks instead of the face buttons like current day. Now granted, 2 joysticks were new for the time, so maybe they just didn't know this would be Oh. The console's been out for 4 years before the game? Oh. Well, it also had very few quality of life features. Loading screens between every zone, which would be the norm until why am I still holding this? What? And many other problems that require you to not only fight the bosses, but the game itself. Fast forward to current day, and not only have those kinks been ironed out, but they also have a well of content to innovate and improve on. Most notably, loads of monsters can return at any point, like a big farting monkey, for example. Plus, it's Capcom, so they have legacy games to pull from, like Mega Man 2, another series built primarily around boss fights. A lot of the bosses are rather basic, especially early on, but when they cook, oh my god, do they cook! Capcom failed to advance the games to modern day standards, so they kinda died off. Not to say there aren't Mega fans out there, I'm not yucking yums, but it has been a long time since we got a Mega Man game that was played by more than the diehard fans. Honestly, I think Cuphead is what Mega Man should become. Let me know what you think. Sorry, I'm getting off track in this scripted video. The second of Monster Hunter's greatest games. In most games, the devs only intend you to beat a boss once, or in Elden Ring's case, 6 times and reused as a standard enemy multiple times. But Monster Hunter's entire gameplay loop is specifically based around you beating a monster multiple times to get stronger gear. This causes the bosses to have a greater variety of attacks and actions that keep the fight fresh for the player on the second fight, the third, the 10th, sometimes even the 100th. Especially when you factor in environmental differences, like that frog. Since the player is fighting the sneezing T-Rex, bless you, many times they start to deeply analyze, I got tripped up, the tells to perfect the fight to some degree. I'm so good. Sometimes consciously, other times not. Here we go, bonk. This then dominoes into the games having an addictive nature to them, either because the next best upgrade or the more perfect fight is on the horizon. Hi, I'm Drew.
Hi, Drew.
I play Monster Hunter. It also causes the player to have this connection to the monsters when combined with their complex, interesting design. The rivals part of that is actually the third prominent perk, a feature that makes Monster Hunter unique. And it has to do with the story of the games, not the one written, but the ones that the players make for themselves. When was the last time you were playing a game and you just stopped and thought, man, because of something outside of the gameplay, something outside of sword hit monster say oof and then die, something more profound, something that changes you internally, something that you'll never forget. The most important rule on this list is one I've been saving, and you're about to see why. Reward. This can be something obvious like better gear, money, or experience, a break from normal gameplay, or progress, but sometimes the reward is just story. And sure, sometimes that's exposition like cutscenes or dialogue, but it can be deeper. Now some of you might be thinking, this video's about Monster Hunter, I don't care about story. Or maybe you do care about storytelling, but Monster Hunter and other gameplay-first games haven't impressed you. No matter your opinion of stories, stick with me. And not only will you honestly be better at video games, but they'll be worth more. Story is everywhere. Even if you don't notice it, even if it isn't directly told to you, every single experience is a story. For example, when I played Everhood, I randomly met this boss. They are incredibly different from every other boss in the game and are barely explained by the story. Maybe in the sequel. It's an incredibly difficult fight, especially compared to everything before it. I struggled with it for hours. It took so much time and effort, and the song still echoes in my head like a traumatic memory. Until an automated ad played and I beat it.
Oh! Yes! God, that took too long! I will patiently wait until the ad is done. All I needed was the poor people to be distracted.
This is the moment I will never forget, both because of the comedic timing and the challenge that I accomplished. Another example, I play a lot of Crusader Kings 3, like too much. Specifically with mods that change the world into either Game of Thrones or Elder Scrolls, because I'm a nerd. I have loads of stories about it, like the time I conquered a large section of the map with orcs who followed the god of chaos just to realize that nobody wanted to fuck us, so we'd have to become inbred. Or the time I found a dragon egg, tried to hatch it, just for it to explode and kill my entire family except for one member who was blind and cheated on his wife, and so many more that I don't have B-roll for, so just ask me in the comments, I'll tell you some stories. These are all random events, not written by the developers, and sure, they can make a challenging fight, but they can't write the events that lead to the player's victory without like a scripted QuickTime event. These are stories written by the player through their experience. If we blur the line between stories written by the developers and the ones written by the players, we get a unique blend of stories using indirection and subtlety. One's told without words, one's present in every video game we've spoken about so far, and every video game you can think of. One that purely relies on viewer interpretation. This is done in so many different ways, like music. Music can be used in many different ways, but in video games, there are two big umbrellas that they fall under. Most of the time, the music works to enhance the scene the player is experiencing. It makes that sad scene of your favorite character dying and turns it up to 11.
Why don't you just make 10 louder and make 10 be the top number and make that a little louder?
These go to 11.
It makes you feel like a war hero fighting for not just your life, but the lives of everyone on Super Earth. It makes boss fights feel truly epic. Music in this form is more than just a sad song on a small violin. The use of things like leitmotifs can tie the music into the greater storyline. These are most commonly found in melodies, but they don't have to be. The use of the same texture or approach can do the same thing, but more subtlety. Subtly, yeah. These can represent a place, a theme, or even a character's presence, maybe even affairs unknown to the player. In Undertale, you're told this pretty early on, but this is a late game boss, so I'm vocally warning you. Spoilers for Undertale. Skip to here to avoid them. How do I unpause? You eventually fight Asgore. He's a pretty chill guy, but you are here for a reason, and he knows that. He shatters the mercy button, and the battle begins. Music kicks in, it's very hyped and hopeful, pushing you to keep going, to keep fighting, because there is only one end to this fight, you or him. The melodies repeat to hint at the plot points about the characters, and in turn the story as a whole, but that's too far for spoilers, I'm not doing all that. Eventually, the pattern breaks, and you're welcomed with this fast, but morose piano jingle. It's sped up to match the cadence of the rest of the song, but it's the same melody used during the game over screen, where text in Asgore's voice pushes you to keep going with determination. He wanted you to come here. He wanted this fight, and it's up to you to end it. Undertale is a masterclass in storytelling via music. These are all examples of the first big umbrella, and this is the most commonly used because it's the safest. It's always difficult to make amazing music, don't get me wrong. Even more so when you're aiming for some level of iconic, but it isn't that difficult to make music that enhances a scene in comparison to the alternative, because what is more difficult is to make music that changes a scene. Let's take the same sad scene from before. Wah, wah, wah. Swap out the music for something goofy. Not sad. It completely changes the mood. This can be done at any point in any kind of media, but boss fights are where this is truly special. In Dark Souls 1, same deal. This is the final boss of Dark Souls 1, and unlike the Undertale talk a second ago, I am going to talk about some story stuff. It's not going to ruin the game for you, not at all. But this is a time code so you can skip past it. Lord Gwyn is an overarching presence throughout the whole game. You can see him at the beginning taking down dragons with lightning bolts, you witness the kingdom he built, and you meet his children's Bahongadonkaroos. At the end of the expedition, you finally meet him for this definitive showdown, but instead of being the shining light of the intro, he's shriveled and dull. The fight is still tough, unless you practice parrying, but he's not the same character from the beginning. The real tell of this isn't from the boss's action or even the design. You look like Bacon 2 and you're doing just fine. Instead, it's from his music. Rather than being an epic orchestra with a choir, which accompanies every boss before him, it is a single piano that only plays the white keys. This song changes the fight. No, this duel that has been built up for hours from being an epic conclusion to a sad mercy killing of a fading god and a flame begging to be extinguished. Don't even get me started on Dark Souls 3 again, come on. Metal Gear Rising is my final example of this, but it does it in a different way that might make it a separate, smaller umbrella, but like with only it underneath it.
My source is that I made it the fuck up.
Hack and slash games commonly have vocals in their tracks, and MGR is no exception. It has both instrumental and vocal tracks that it weaves throughout the game. Like most games, each boss has a little introduction to get to know them before you dive into the fight, but you don't really get to learn much about them in that short time, so you don't really know why you're fighting them beyond it being your mission.
The memes.
Each boss in MGR has a vocal track tied specifically to them. The music tells you who they are, their motivations, and sometimes even their inner thoughts and insecurities. Give it a listen. I don't know any other game that does this. It's amazing. To restate, music can enhance, add to, or change a scene, like Souls. But these are all things that can happen after you meet the boss or enter a scene. Music is rarely the first impression for most people. Other aspects strike long before the music even penetrates their goofy little lobes. Instead, visual stimuli holds that honor, and it's a heavy weight to carry. For bosses, this means two things: area design and character design. Let's tackle the latter first. Character design is usually the first impression. Very quickly, we can discern if a boss looks threatening, cool, or lackluster, which of course can also be deceiving. Without even including music, sound design, or dialogue into the equation, you can learn so much about a character's story in the greater world just by judging the book by its cover. Then by adding in these three aspects, it twists and changes that into reality. Unlike the music garbage we just spoke about, this has a lot to do with gameplay, and could have been included in Chapter 1, I just didn't want to. This is where storytelling and gameplay start to mesh together in the one delicious stew. Character movements tell you when an attack is coming. That's animation that ties into the character design, because big sword means slow crash boom. In this aspect, you also learn weaknesses. Slow crash boom means easy dodge. Even more so, the use of color or effects can tease weaknesses. This guy uses fire stuff, so a good guess is water stuff makes fire guy go oof, ow. This guy, look at that big eyeball. Yeah, big eyeball? Yep. Throw a stick in it. These are character design decisions that are obvious to most players. Sometimes this stuff is more subtle. especially when in a realistic setting, like Abby being jacked is a hint to her being really into golfing. But I prefer it when they're more emphasized to the extremes. Lady Luctopus in, Luctopus? Well, it's octopus, so it's Luctopus. In Psychonauts 2 is formed by the player connecting the ideas of risk and money while inside of someone's brain. That's what you do in the game, you go into brain. In turn, the boss resembles a casino dealer with lights everywhere like a Vegas strip. They have cufflinks and a bow tie like a dealer. And instead of suction cups, they have chips that can then be knocked away to reveal weak points. This forms a hentai that I've definitely never seen. This character has a whole history before the player even met them though, so they use defibrillators. There are hearts and cold boxes throughout the fight, and there's a massive heart inside their head that both signals that damage can be dealt, and they all hint to their past as a hospital worker. All of these things are told to you before fighting the boss, but you can see all of them represented, and by looking at their hair, it hints at who the character is outside of the brain. It is possible to hit somewhere in the middle of exaggerated stylization and realism though, like with Radon in Elden Ring. Pre-DLC, pre-Night Rain, haven't played either of them, I don't know nothing. Not much is told to you about him during the game other than him being an amazing general. Even after reading item descriptions, you don't have much to go on, and most of what they tell you can be figured out just by looking at it. Radon is a hulking warrior with armor that parallels Godfrey, the first Elden Lord, a man he looks up to, but with hair that calls back to his heritage as Radagon's son, the second Elden Lord. He has spears in his back, referencing the battle scene in the trailer, his skills at taking penetration, and the cause of the area's desolation. More on that in a second. All of this is obvious just by one glance, if you know who Radagon and Godfrey vaguely are, and by this point of the game, the odds of you having that knowledge are high, since there are paintings of them everywhere.
Okay, I like it, Picasso.
But if you look real closely at him, if you really observe his character design, you'll notice his scrawny little horse. He doesn't serve a purpose during the fight. Radon isn't really even riding him anymore, and yet he hints at the second phase of the fight because he's the only reason it exists. We stan Leonard in this house. Circling back, Radon's decimated surroundings are a huge focal point of not just his boss fight and his story, but the story of the entire game. No, I'm not talking about the person who caused it, not even the story that is told to you while playing, but rather the story of its creation and how the development styles change the way we consume the final product, which can help give us a key to understand the entire game's plot, and it's a key that can work on every single one of Hidetaka Miyazaki's games so far. I've been teasing this moment the whole damn video, alright? Let's talk about some world building. While character design is probably the most important aspect of boss design, world design is what kind of ties it all together.
Fucking A.
Because even if the game is only bosses, they still need to inhabit an interesting environment. And that environment decides the style of the bosses and the characters. What time is the game set in? Is it historical or fantasy? What aesthetic does the game use? Is it realistic or stylized? Playful or serious? What is the general theme? These things aren't related to a single boss or a character, but rather an over-encompassing decision that drastically transforms the experience as a whole. Because unless they're aiming for thematic severance to induce shock and awe, it'd be really strange if there was an alien in Kingdom Come Deliverance. Thematic severance is basically the entire theme of Mario Odyssey, and it worked really well there because of the story being told. This is all just one step of the process. And while diving deeper would make for an interesting video, stay tuned by subscribing. You're this far into the video, you must like it to some extent. That's pretty much as far as it applies to boss design specifically. So we're going to shift our focus to the order of operations and how they affect the operations that follow, rather than the operations themselves. He's dead! Next turn! As I've said many times, bosses are usually the third act, so placement is kind of important. If they're a first boss, then they'll teach a lesson of some kind. But if they're the final boss of a level, they're a big deal. What I left out of Chapter 1 is that all of this only really applies to linear games, or at the very least a linear segment. In this kind of experience, developers can control the order of when you encounter things. They can control the pacing of the story and gameplay, The more linear the game, the more specifically crafted it is. With the addition of player choice, open-ended games are an entirely different beast. The entire map morphs to adhere to it, and so they're formed in two different ways, at least when it applies to bosses. And even then, there could be more ways. Every developer is different. Also, I want to be clear that neither of these methods are wrong. Okay, these aren't bad. Okay, they just result in vastly different games. Anyway, From Software, Miyazaki has stated that they made Elden Ring's map by placing the bosses on it first, and then they designed the map surrounding them. This is a similar method to what they've done in the past with prior games. They then most likely adjust the boss fight as the world surrounding them develops, like Radahn's second phase changing from being a completely different boss into them being two separate bosses in different areas. Radahn is Miyazaki's favorite boss, by the way. This method makes it so the world is designed to surround the character's theme, like there's a pinboard with strings all leading back to the characters, rather than them just existing in a world older than them. If you know Elden Ring lore, I've done an entire lore through of the game, this makes a lot of sense. It's really hard to find a storyline that doesn't directly tie to one of the big bosses we fight throughout the story. You can only really think of one or two without digging for it, and even then they might be answered by the DLC or this new game, I don't know. This directly contradicts the alternative method, which is why we've spoken about Elden Ring so much in this video. Instead of designing and placing the bosses first, Capcom takes the opposite approach. They design an interesting environment that usually parallels real environments in some way. This could be theoretically possible, a realistic concept pushed to the extreme, or something that could just exist in real life. This map is then populated with an ecosystem. So first the small predators and herbivores out in an open field, and then we get to the bosses. They make bigger predators. These are usually the first monsters you fight in the game and aren't that deep into the zone. And then the alphas. The deeper into the zone, the stronger they are. This is based on condors at Chile at the peak of a mountain. Then lastly, there's bottom feeders and decomposer. For those of you that took biology class or watched that one episode of Adventure Time, this is a food chain. They then alter the environment to fit certain monsters' needs, like they need things to climb on so they can do cool stuff, or Banbaro? I realize I've never said these names out loud. I've just kind of read them. He needs to pick up stuff so he can fling it at you. This is the example that the devs use to explain the concept as well. This is all super important to the equation that is Monster Hunter. Most of the quotes I've been using are based on Monster Hunter World, but this isn't a new concept. Just there's more info about that game in English than any of the others. Monster Hunter has always been focused on a realistic ecosystem that produces more than characters for you to fight, but instead active elements in a world that is alive. Every boss's weapon has a logical reason for it being there in nature, and is a response to their environment rather than the individual characters, including humanity. I think the player's position in this ecosystem is what makes Monster Hunter such a good game. At the bottom, below the whale poop. In reality, all of this isn't what makes Monster Hunter the perfect boss fighter.
My source is that I made it the fuck up.
It's the culmination of their success, but success takes time, and for them, that meant years upon years of failure. This is leading to something great. I know I've been telling you to wait a lot. I know. I'm aware. Let me cook. I'm cooking right now. I'm ratatouille in the kitchen cooking. I'm not the human. They don't know how to cook. I'm not them. I'm the rat on the head with pulling at the hair, controlling the part. Can you tell that these parts aren't scripted? Can you tell? Whoa, sorry about that, but with all due respect, what are you doing watching this flub nut when we gotta finish this scraper? We won't be able to do it without you. I mean, how else are we gonna fund all these goobers? Supporting is easy. All you gotta do is head over to patreon.com/DrewSunn, that's 2 N's, no spaces, where we got 2 tiers set up for you. Link down below too. At $1 tier, where you can get behind the scenes content, including sneak peeks at upcoming videos, recommendations of content related to the next videos, and updates of how the video's going, plus a bit more. Or if you're feeling extra generous, there's a $20 tier, which gets your name at the end of videos if you're subscribed during that month, and a random chance to get a vocal shout out mid-video. All this talk about subs and subscriptions and so on and so forth is making me hungry. When the lunch bell rings, I think I'm gonna head down to the Arctic Flus Bodega for a salami. I should mention that these tiers are subject to change and to be added to. This is the first time we've ever funded an entire building like this, so it's an experiment. We're open to suggestions. Enough of this wacky yapping. I gotta get back to work. Enjoy the rest of your green screen white guy video. After 2 prior games, I own one, Capcom released Monster Hunter 1 in 2004 to capitalize on the PlayStation 2's online capability. Ryozo Sugimoto, who worked on all 3, believes Monster Hunter is successful because of those 2 prior games. Ryozo is the 3rd son of Capcom's founder and CEO, but because of his other 2 brothers, not much was expected of him by his father. His older brother, for example, worked his way up to president of Capcom. Ryozo has worked on every single Monster Hunter game to some capacity. We all love him, he's super chill, and his favorite weapon is hammer.
You so fucking precious when you smile.
Monster Hunter was developed to focus on player skill and intentionally avoided being hack and slash. If a player wasn't experienced with the game, it was believed co-op would make up for their skill issue. Originally, they were planning on it being high fantasy with magic and stuff, but they pulled it back and made it way more grounded. We are just starting to establish zoology, except instead of big cat, it's giant cat with fire breath. After its release, they made an enhanced edition in 2005 named G, or Ultimate in the West, and a portable edition for the PISP named Portable, or Freedom in the West. This began the explosion of popularity in Japan, which increased exponentially with Monster Hunter DOS in 2006, to the point where it was everywhere. Western players didn't attach to it due to the difficulty curve, and they didn't work as teams very well, making it so that the co-op couldn't correct this skill issue. And it is confirmed to be a skill issue. This got better with time. Try was released in 2009 on the Wii.
In life, they're hunters, and then they're monster hunters. And then there's wee little babies crying for their maws.
The first game to leave PlayStation. Despite the controversial water combat, the game finally found footing in the West, which caused Capcom to prioritize localization more. 2013, Monster Hunter 4 broke 1 million sales, obviously caused by the addition of the best weapon, Insect Glaive, aka Bug Stick. Then, in 2015, they released Generations. If you're keeping track, this is now 11 years of Monster Hunter, and because of that, Generations is meant to be a celebration of all of this history we've just spoken about. It's a swan song, not for Monster Hunter as a whole, but just this format of Monster Hunter, because they knew that World was coming. They knew it was going to change everything. And it did. In 2018, Monster Hunter World was released, and it quickly became Capcom's best-selling game. It was specifically designed to obtain global interest, and in turn, was designed to be friendly to new players. Many gameplay advancements were made due to new tech, most notably no loading screens between zones, and an incredibly dense open world. Everything added or changed had to be carefully balanced with old concepts, being very careful to not reduce the franchise. World also got an ultimate version named Iceborne in 2019, breaking the trend.
I'm so cold that I'm shivering.
Rise then took a step back in 2021, trying to be both World and Generations and blur the line between them. But it kind of ended up just being a not great version of both with really cool movement tech. Obviously, in my opinion, there are plenty who love Rise. I'm not yucking your yum. I also heard Sunbreak improved on it a lot, but I didn't play it yet. And then Wilds in 2025. All of that is what it takes to make the perfect boss fighter. Everything we've spoken about in this video can be seen perfected in Monster Hunter. Chapter 2. They have the world building of an actual ecosystem, which creates purpose for these monsters and their surroundings. They have character design that fulfills that purpose or marks their evolutionary roots, and they have music that not only fits the vibe, but also indicates the monster's roots and inspirations. In Chapter 1, they follow the rules of the boss fight until you meet an Elder Dragon, and they have many different types of bosses depending on progression by using the food chain. In World, you meet a great Jagras, and then minutes later, you meet the bigger fish.
There's always a bigger fish.
So it took 5 years of blatant failure, and then 5 more of like a global middling reception to get the success and recognition that they deserve. I, as of this year, have been creating content for 9 years with very little success. I've put out Let's Plays, I've streamed, I've done podcasts, I've made videos about new game releases, showcase recaps, an award show, a gaming news show for a very long time, and now I've been making video essays for 2 years while also streaming regularly and posting VODs on a separate channel. Because of all that, I not only love Monster Hunter, but I relate to the path that it took towards success. I have a weird parasocial connection to it because of this struggle. It makes me believe that if I keep trying, if I keep going, I'll succeed. This is why this video is so important to me and why it's structured in the way that it is. I not only wanted to point out why Monster Hunter is so amazing and why I think you should play it, but I also am pushing for us as gamers to pay attention to the little details about these bosses, because everything is intentional, including your journey. It was all building to this moment right here, where we could truly see why Monster Hunter is not only the best of these types of games, but would you guys hear something? Whoa! Evolve was an asymmetrical multiplayer game developed by the remnants of Turtle Rock Studios after they released Left 4 Dead 2 and a lot of the team joined Valve proper. It was also written by Matt Colville, who is now a content creator mostly surrounding D&D, so that's pretty cool. One real-life person would play a monster, of which there were many options, and would evolve throughout the game to get stronger until they were able to destroy their ultimate goal and win the game. They'd have to do this while 4 real-life people were hunting them down, all with different roles. My favorite was Trapper. Now I'm a controller main in Valorant, so it kinda all tracks. It was a massive game of cat and mouse, but more like 4 kittens against the giant rat that makes all the rules. I fucking loved it. But notice the past tense. It was originally published by THQ, who are now Embracer Group, aka the true villains of the gaming industry. They sold off the IP, and Turtle Rock attempted to buy it for $250K, but lost to Take-Two for $10.84 million.
Hello, Pancake here for an important clarification. 2K are the publishers of Evolve and many other games. Take-Two Interactive are the owners of 2K but are not publishers themselves. Drew says Take-Two throughout this segment instead of 2K. You can probably tell why he made this error. Okay, back to balloon blowing duty. Enjoy the rest of the video.
Take-Two are the publisher for Rockstar, so GTA 6, but also countless sports games that are known for their greedy practices with microtransactions. You can see where this is going. Evolve was designed from the ground up with DLC in mind, which today just means a live service game. We have countless great games for free, but there are also countless examples of greed getting the best of these publishers, with the worst example by far being Concord's rapid demise. PlayStation released Concord following 8 years of development since 2017, just for the game to feel outdated since it was chasing a long-gone trend with a $40 price tag in a free-to-play world. Concord got shut down 2 weeks after release, and the death of the studio wasn't long after. When it's done well, it provides a long life. Fortnite was released in 2017, and that was the goal for Evolve. But before the Battle Pass became commonplace, it was a horrible marketing pitch for players. It made it seem like there was going to be a lack of content off launch, and it made people question the game's motivations, especially when you look at Take-Two's other ventures. When it did eventually launch, following a massive marketing campaign for years and a well-received beta, it had a season pass, which again was new for the time, so people were confused and did not like it, plus it cost $60 for the base game. Most live service games today are free to play for a reason. or at least a reduced price, but that doesn't always work out either. If you wanted the season pass with it, you could buy the deluxe edition for $80, or you could buy the $100 pack for the day one DLC. Yes, there was a lot of day one DLC too. An extra skin, and an entirely new monster 30 days before anyone else would get them, and a 5th monster down the line. Now, I know that a lot of what I just said might sound bad, and my empty wallet is screaming in pain, but the only thing about all of that greed that I disagree with is the monsters and the hunters costing money. I think that's really where they went wrong with this, alongside the horrible marketing surrounding DLC, but that's kind of not mostly their fault, because like it was new. Oh yeah, they also announced a mobile spin-off game and had a weird esports thing, which I think kind of points to what was wrong. There wasn't a lot of content off launch. Only 2 modes and one added later, all death matches in different ways. No single player. And not that many hunters or monsters. Not that many skins. It feels like to me the actual problem is a lack of content due to misappropriated priorities and funds. Turtle Rock blamed the focus on DLC for the negative reception and claimed that it was out of their control, pointing to 2K limiting updates to every 3 months and thinking they could have fixed people's issues if they were allowed to release things live. But he also admits that there were other flaws. Eventually, the game went free to play and got a massive player boost, but that dropped off immediately, and that might be because of the repetition of the game, which eventually caused it to get shut down. Turtle Rock has since released Back 4 Blood and is rumored to be working on a sequel, but people do desire a follow-up to Evolve. It's not just me. Evolve did spawn other asymmetrical games like Friday the 13th, Dead by Daylight, and Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but none of them have really filled the void that Evolve left. Not just in the gaming industry, but in my heart. The closest thing to it is probably Predator Hunting Grounds, but that launched on Epic, so it died pretty much instantly too. And there obviously were other asymmetrical multiplayer games before Evolve. I'm not at all saying that it's the first. Special shout out to Arkham Origins, that game rocked. But this was by far the biggest one, and its effect is so clearly seen. Some of you might be asking, why are you talking about this dead game in a video that's supposed to be about Monster Hunter? Well, firstly, this is a video. I can't hear you. Stop talking to your screen like a middle-aged man watching football. Secondly, a very common late-game boss in Monster Hunter is Fatalis. Fatalis is a giant elder dragon who is quirky and not like the other girls. Most elder dragons resemble a real-world phenomenon, a disaster or cataclysm. Kirin is a thunderstorm, Deora is a tornado, Zora is an actual volcano, and many more. But Fatalis doesn't really represent anything in particular, except maybe the apocalypse. Fatalis hates all living creatures, humans most of all, and actively hunts them down. By the time we've armed ourselves to the teeth using monster parts, we're able to take down monsters that rival gods. So Fatalis is the creature above us in the food chain, because that's right, we're on the food chain too, alongside all the other monsters. Monster Hunter. We're the most dangerous game. In Evolve, a human controls a creature. They have tells, a design that hints to their abilities and story, a soundtrack in a world that allows their evolution and also helps tell their story. But just to repeat myself a little bit here. Most video games use finite state machines to decide which attacks the enemy will use based on player range, position, or action. Humans' brain doesn't, and they're the ones making the choices in Evolve. So, what I'm saying is, the ultimate boss fight is humanity. In video games, of course. In video games. Not real life. Video games. Don't do anything crazy. So what the hell am I yapping about? This video is admittedly more ranty and rambly than my usual. So let's tie it up in a nice little cute little bow. Firstly, I think it's obvious that I want Evolve to come back in some form. And I'm not the only one that thinks this. It's not like I think Evolve is the perfect game or has flawless boss fights. It's just nothing else like it. And I feel the potential for what that game could have been is easy to see, at least for those who played it at the time, which makes it hurt even more than that it was never able to reach that potential. Secondly, a much less selfish takeaway. There is a lot going on during a boss fight, more than just sword hit Big Dino till dead. From their design to the world that surrounds them to their music, most of the time, these bits and pieces are meaningful. Not just to the story of the thing you're fighting, but to the gameplay too. By paying closer attention to these little details, you can gain knowledge about the fight itself. Monster Hunter World, for example, let's look at Nergigante, aka Nergi. They have spikes all over their body that slowly turn black, but if you look closely while fighting it, you'll notice that these break easier when they're white. So a way to make the fight easier is to prioritize the white spikes before they harden with tar. This also helps explain why they're feeding on elder dragons, which relates to the entire plot of the video game. Plus another reason, but I'm gonna let you figure that one out on your own. I'm not gonna spoil the whole game for you. But by paying attention to the little details like this, you'll find that you're actually watching the fight a lot more than you would have been otherwise, making it so that you also notice tells for the attacks, which makes you better at the video games. But there's one more benefit. Every single one of these elements was carefully crafted by a human, hopefully. They had to choose to give the character that cloak, horn, or to put him up on that hill, or to put that dragon there. So, next time you're fighting a boss, or just playing a game, take a breath, look around, and appreciate the moment you're in. You most likely spent a lot of money on the game you're playing, so make it worth it and smell the roses. Smell-o-vision is extra. The developers put a lot of time into the game. The least we can do is give it our time to judge the game based on the whole experience rather than relying on comparisons to fill in the gaps. Speak more about that in this video right here. This will also help you enjoy games more, so I think that you're gonna like this video if you made it this far in this video. So, click it. Thank you for watching. I love you. Mwah!